Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Tuesday, June 1st, 2021. And our top story today, donor-advised funds are the top option in charitable giving. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Howard Husick. He is Senior Executive Fellow for the Philanthropy Roundtable. Howard, it's so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
And this is an amazing topic, and I love talking about charitable donations, charitable giving. Before we get into donor-advised funds, what they are, how they work, etc., let's talk about the pandemic and its impact on not-for-profits that serve our communities. What can you tell us about how they fared during the 2020-21 pandemic?
Well, of course, every individual nonprofit has its own story, so it's hard to generalize. It's certainly the case that a lot of them were under pressure because you can't work remotely at a food pantry. You've got to be there to hand out the food to the person who's coming up. So they had to keep their staff there. If their staff wasn't showing up for work, that was a problem. Normal flows of donations may have declined. Those could have been problems. So certainly there were stresses on the nonprofit sector. However, we do have some interesting new data from the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And working with the Bank of America, they surveyed affluent donors. The reason you would survey affluent donors is because a great deal of our charitable giving comes from the most affluent. So it's important to find out what they've been doing. And it turns out that they have increased their giving really a great deal based on this survey. And I'll just read from the report. In response to the pandemic, 93% of these high net worth families maintained or increased their giving to the frontline organizations providing basic needs, healthcare and medicine. 85% of households maintained or increased giving to religious institutions. At 94% increased or maintained their giving to education, the arts, and the environment. And 90% of that giving, this is really interesting, included giving to local organizations, and a lot of that included volunteer help on the part of the donors. So we don't know how any individual organization fared. Many of them were under stress, but we do know that people opened their checkbooks.
And these not-for-profits serve all of our communities across the country. Very important to their mission, their initiatives. So very important that they are keeping afloat and delivering those services. Now, Howard, I want to talk about donor-advised funds. This is I know you wrote a piece on this, several pieces on this. This is one of the fastest growing areas of charitable donations. First, let's define what a donor-advised fund is and how they work.
Well, the way to think about a donor-advised fund is as an individual charitable account. We have IRAs, individual retirement accounts. An individual charitable account is tax advantage money that you've put aside, and it can only be used in the future for one purpose: charitable giving. When you put it aside, you get a charitable tax deduction for the amount that you've put aside. Now, fewer and fewer people are actually able to take charitable tax deductions because of the increase in the standard deduction. But assuming you're eligible, you're not taking the standard deduction, when you open a donor-advised fund and you contribute funds, you could contribute unrealized capital gains from stocks, you can contribute non-liquid assets that would then be evaluated, artwork, anything that has charitable value can be contributed to a donor-advised fund. Once it's in there, you can't get it back. It can only be used for future charitable giving. And there are about more than 700,000 of such accounts now in the country. They've grown like topsy in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, thanks again for defining that and also for highlighting the tax advantaged nature of it. And it sounds like you mentioned retirement accounts like an IRA or a 401k, maybe even a 529 to me falls into this category. What about some of the costs to do this? So those people, watching the show, may find this interesting as a donation mechanism. We're going to get into more of that a little bit later on. But are there costs associated with these donor advised funds that people need to be aware of?
Well, if you open a donor advised fund at one of the major, what are called commercial DAFs, commercial donor advised funds, Fidelity, Vanguard, the National Philanthropic Trust, which is linked to Wells Fargo, or Charles Schwab, Schwab Charitable, the funds that are in there appreciate in value. They are managed and invested. So if you put $50,000 in one of those funds, you usually have a choice between conservative and aggressive management. I think some of them have ESG or other specialty investment vehicles. So the funds actually can grow in value, assuming the market as a whole goes up. At the same time, those providers of that service take a really quite small, I'm thinking 2%, but it might even be less than that, administrative fee. And of course, that just comes out of the charitable reserve. You're not paying yourself anymore at all.
Yeah, and Howard, in terms of getting access to this, can I get access to it as just a regular person? I don't have to be. Do I have to be affluent, I guess, to have access to it, or can anybody really have access to it?
The Fidelity account, Fidelity Charitable, is now the largest not-for-profit organization in the United States because it manages some hundreds of thousands of donor advised funds, and all those assets accumulated under its umbrella make it the largest charitable organization in the United States. You can open an account there with, I'm pretty sure, $5,000. So
okay. Well, Howard, I want to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Howard about more of the nuts and bolts, how you can direct charitable donations through DAFs. Stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking to Howard Husick of the Philanthropy Roundtable. Howard, thanks for staying with us this morning.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, this is, and I love talking about charity, family involved with not-for-profits for their careers. So this is kind of hits near home for me. Let's talk. I want to pick up on the conversation. Let's start off with, let's reiterate the tax advantages and say that you are a retiree or someone getting close to retirement. This really provides a tax advantage for you to shelter some of your money and write some of it off, I would imagine, so that you're not taxed as heavily in retirement.
Well, what's really interesting with the donor advised fund, let's say I'm 60 years old or I'm 55 years old and I'm planning to work for another 10 or 15 years. When I'm in retirement, my income may decrease significantly. And so I may not be eligible to take a charitable tax deduction at that point because I won't have enough income to itemize my deductions. But if I put money in a donor advised fund when I'm 55 or 60, when I'm still at or near my peak earning years, I can maximize the value of my tax deduction, the charitable tax deduction, which I might not be able to take in my retirement. At the same time, I'm a busy person when I'm working. Maybe I don't want to think too hard about where I want to invest my charitable dollars. Well, then once I retire in the fullness of time, that money has been in the donor advised fund, what I like to call an individual charitable account. It's been growing in value. Unless the stock market crashes, sometimes it does, but basically it's been growing in value.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and now I have a chance to disperse it in the fullness of time, thinking about how I want to put it to the highest and best use.
Yeah, let's talk about that disbursement, because you talked about how it's invested. We talked about the fees, kind of how the process works. Let's talk about if Jeff Snyder has, or my parents or someone has priorities. They want to give some money to a religious institution. They want to give money to a local healthcare organization or a not-for-profit for the homeless, for example. Can you direct that money individually? And let's just say it's not $1 million. Let's just say it's $100,000. It's $85,000. Do I have the ability as the individual investing in the donor advised fund to allocate that where I want it?
That's exactly what you have. That is the whole point of the donor advised fund. It's called a donor advised fund because you would be the donor advisor. You would advise Fidelity or Vanguard or your local community foundation, which most of those have umbrella donor advised funds as well. Chicago Community Trust, New York Community Trust. You advise them where you want that money to go. And so you would choose, you would type into their website, I want to make a grant. Where? I want to make it to homeless shelter A. You would be queried, do they have an EIN number? Or they have a huge database. They may just be able to pull it up right away. And so individual direction by you is the core aspect of a donor advised fund. Fidelity is not making any decisions about where your money is going to go, zero.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you, it's almost very similar in some ways to what a Bill and Melinda Gates have, but at a smaller scale. You can direct money where it needs to go. Let me ask you a question in terms of some of the development directors at these not-for-profits. Are they aware of donor advised funds? Are they soliciting individuals to set them up? Should you be reaching out to your favorite charity in advance of a donor or not-for-profit, in advance of setting up a donor advised fund? What are some of the best practices there?
Well, you don't have to get in touch with the charity. If it's a bona fide charity with an EIN number that reports to the IRS, you can simply direct your donor advised fund as the advisor to it to grant monies to your favorite charity. Now, development directors have increasingly become aware that when they receive funds from a donor advised fund, they should then understand who those donor advisors are. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, well over 95% of the time, the donors are not anonymous. You do have the right to be anonymous in a donor advised fund, just as you have the right to be anonymous with any gift you make. But development directors will want to say, oh, this is from the Jeff Snyder donor advised fund. I never got any money from him before. I'm going to find out who this guy is and ring him up. Maybe he'll increase his donation next year. So they're aware that donor advised funds are a new pot of money they should take advantage of. When the gifts are anonymous, they're not as able to do that, but that's one of the rights that you have as a donor advisor.
You know, we often on this program talk about financial planning. We don't just talk about all financial planning. We talk about a lot of topics, but one of the topics is financial planning. Do I need to broach this conversation with my financial advisor, or will he or she possibly bring that up to me and say, hey, have you thought about a donor advised fund? How does that process work? I mean, I would think that either in the estate planning or in the financial planning aspect of working with someone that they might bring this up as an option.
They should, because as you know, with the increase in the standard deduction, it's difficult now there aren't that many tax deductions left, right? Even home mortgage is capped. Interest payments are not what they used to be in terms of it being a deduction. The charitable deduction is essentially uncapped unless you're extremely wealthy, up to 50% of income. It's essentially uncapped. So it's a very good one to use, and it's a good thing to do, right? This is not just a tax break for you. You are doing something good by putting money in a reserve account for charity. I would focus on the financial planning rather than the estate planning. Once you're deceased, you don't necessarily want these donor advised funds to go on. You have the right to appoint a successor. You could appoint your children, and it would be like your own family foundation. You could do that. A lot of donor advised funds will just sunset, or you would also have the right to say, I want the remainder to be dispersed among these 5 organizations that I have supported historically. That becomes a question of whether you want to involve your children in your charitable giving or whether you think that's going to be a burden to them. That's a very personal decision.
Yeah. Last question, Howard. A lot of change, obviously, in Washington, D.C. A lot of change being discussed around taxes. How does this kind of factor into those discussions? Are these things that the Congress is looking at? We've already heard some movement around retirement legislation, but is there other legislation potentially around charitable donations? How does that kind of set things up for donor advised funds going forward?
A couple of things. If the marginal tax rate goes up, as they're talking about, that takes a larger bite out of your income. It also makes the value of your charitable deduction greater, right? So you're getting 39 cents on the dollar rather than 24 cents on the dollar or whatever it has been. So the value of your charitable deduction will go up with your marginal tax rate. There is talk that there should be a required time period in which you disperse the funds from your donor advised fund. Some people are talking about a 15. Right now, there's no requirement. There's no minimum payout, right? And some people are concerned about that. But the funds can only be used for charity, either now or in the future. So that has always struck me as a solution without a problem. And more than 24% of funds are dispersed every year from these donor advised funds. So think about that compared to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is only required to disperse 5%. So DAFs are giving at a high level. There is this discussion about saying they've got to pay out in a certain period of time. That doesn't seem to be going anywhere right now, but it's on the horizon.
Yeah. Well, look, this is amazing. I love talking about charity and not-for-profits. I think this is just another avenue for people to save. And look, you don't have to be Bill and Melinda Gates to give money. You can do it. You can be of meager, smaller means and still contribute to your community and society. Howard, we're going to have to leave it there. But look, we look forward to speaking with you again and having you back on the program again very soon.
Anytime, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement market technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for another educational, exciting, and entertaining edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired of the same old stuff.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.